As the current console generation winds down, albeit with 1 year left to go, all eyes begin focusing on what's next. We know that Google Stadia will be pioneering an all-streaming gaming platform, Microsoft are set to drop 2 models at the same time for their codenamed Xbox Scarlet, and Nintendo will no doubt do something surprising that you couldn't predict with a few hundred fortune tellers. Back to Sony though, as their runaway success this generation was less a product of any concrete game plan, and instead just what they didn't do. All Sony had to do was hang back, let Microsoft make the first blunderous move with the Xbox One and its DRM, always online, can't trade games in setup, then be everything that console was not. For the Players was born, and a patronizing how to trade games on PS4 buried the competition overnight. It was such a roundly successful trouncing, Microsoft have been playing catch up ever since. However, as we know from the last time Sony were on top with the PS3's unveiling, they're not so great at leading the way. And look, I obviously hope Sony succeed. PlayStation consoles have given me some of the best memories of my entire life, and the company's first-party lineup this generation has been exemplary. But I would be lying if I was entirely confident based on what's out there. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and this is the PS5 9 massive problems fans won't see coming. Number 9. Half-baked backwards compatibility. Amongst all the excitement for more consoles and hardware power, you've likely caught wind of Sony's commitment to backwards compatibility with the PS5. Coming from lead architect Mark Cerny, a patent was filed that alluded to the idea of any past-gen disc being playable on the new system. Like how the Xbox One handles things, you'd slot the disc in, and the console would emulate the requisite software on the inside, tricking the disc to thinking that it's running on the system it was first designed for. However, while Sony are yet to demonstrate any of this, one of their spokespeople let the cat out of the bag, noting that backwards compatibility is still being worked on. According to them, and I quote, "The dev team is still putting all power on verifying whether they can secure complete compatibility." And to be honest, this makes it sound like we have a case-by-case basis of publisher approval. This is the way that Microsoft have handled things on Xbox, and to be honest, it makes sense. Tons of publishers signed on to remaster or remake deals this generation, including Sony, and they're not going to start undercutting their own sales by letting you play the version you already own. According to trusted journalist Patrick Klebeck, a big part of PS5's internal mandate is history. But to be honest, I'll believe it when I see it. Number 8. Not securing studios and exclusives. After a generation mostly consisting of software parity between the PS4 and Xbox One, the old-school console wars are coming back next time around, and in a big way. Microsoft fired a notable salvo at the end of 2018, acquiring Ninja Theory, Obsidian, and In Exile Entertainment. All massive gets going forward as their iconic, critically acclaimed catalogs speak for themselves. This came after netting Compulsion Games, Undead Labs, and Playground Games, which was followed up in 2019 by nabbing Tim Schafer and Double Fine, another studio with legions of fans and a back catalogue of genuinely essential video games bursting with character and memorable mechanics. By contrast, Sony have acquired one studio in the same amount of time, Insomniac. And don't get me wrong, the mighty Spider-Man on PS4 was a spectacular title that netted Sony a ton of money. But one purchase in the face of so many, it shows a lack of reading the terrain when it comes to how the next generation is going to pan out. Microsoft have been playing the long game with the likes of Game Pass, monthly installment options, crossplay, and the future of exclusives for years. Sony needs to realize what's happening, or the most exciting new games will be on Xbox. Number 7. Another reliance on Killzone to shift units. Word of a new Killzone has been appearing across the internet for the last few months, and you just need to connect the dots. First up, it was mentioned on Sacred Symbols, ex-IGN editor Colin Moriarty's podcast, where he intoned very heavily that it would be the next game from Guerrilla, before Horizon's next chapter. Of course, since then, we have seen that Guerrilla are also hiring for another Horizon, so it's kinda up in the air as to whether that comes first or we just get more Killzone. Because when it comes to Guerrilla's FPS franchise, they also put out a major hiring call, snapping up 2 key personnel from runaway success Rainbow Six Siege, the game's director Simon LaRouche and multiplayer designer Chris Lee, both people instrumental to that title turning itself around in a big way, and 2 people that you would want if you were, say, making another first-person shooter. The problem with all of this, though, Killzone has never been what Sony needed to be. From the original advertised as a Halo killer, which was always a laughable assumption, to the second game charting at number 5 after an E3 where Sony showed CG footage instead of gameplay, it's always stuck as a B, almost C-tier franchise that would be better off going away altogether. Killzone 3 had some neat hybridized multiplayer modes, and Shadowfall was an early graphical showcase, but any reliance on Killzone to try and shift consoles yet again is misguided at best. Number 6. Underpowered at launch. The fact that the Xbox One X is the most powerful system on the planet simply doesn't matter right now because Sony are way too far out in front. That key phrasing though is for now. For the next generation, while specs are starting to leak out and come together, an early report from Trusted Reviews has outlined that the PS5 will be behind the Nvidia RTX 2080 graphics cards, putting PC owners ahead once again when it comes to sheer horsepower. Compared to what we know about Xbox Scarlett, and one major thing sticks out. Microsoft are planning on dropping multiple SKUs at launch, rather like the existing three-pronged assault of Xbox One, Xbox One S, and Xbox One X. At time of recording, the codename Xbox Scarlett refers to both the Xbox Anaconda and Xbox Lockhart, the latter being more affordable as the basic model, with the Anaconda being a deluxe Xbox One X level product. Point being, as Microsoft are a PC manufacturer and their Xbox division has prioritized power for years now, the Anaconda could be the best place to invest your cash rather than a soon-to-be outstripped PS5. Number 5. State of Play still a mess. Sony have not got a clue what to do with State of Play. Like with so many things they see and ape for themselves, achievements becoming trophies, Wii motion controls into PS Move, Oculus VR into PSVR, etc., State of Play is literally Sony doing Nintendo's direct showcases with their own titles. Even the aesthetic and animations are a carbon copy. The problem, alongside this, Sony don't have a first-party structure to reveal scores of important announcements there and then, and all State of Plays so far have been painful disappointments. Reliant on one big announcement to get people in, like say The Last of Us 2's release date or some potential gameplay, the reality is that we end up watching random indie titles for 15 minutes only to get a glimpse at what should have opened the show. For State of Play to work, Sony would have to corral their biggest first and second party teams into specific timetables, and that clearly doesn't work with the scales of production these teams are working on. And after all of this, The Last of Us 2's announced release date at State of Play was then delayed further into 2020, proving that whatever strings were pulled to nail down a potential announcement didn't even hold in the end. Number 4. The price. How much do you expect to pay for a new video game console? The assumption changes by person and the feature set being advertised, but it's worth noting that the last time Sony were on top of the world, across the PS2's lifetime and on the eve of dropping PS3 details, they completely dropped the ball. Asking Americans to pay $300 for a 20-gig model or a whopping $600 for 60-gig, Sony's own Ken Kutaragi added insult to injury, stating that the company wanted people to work more hours to buy one, and saying that we want people to feel like they want it, irrespective of anything else. Obviously, this chest-puffing attitude didn't go down too well, and it allowed the 360 to run away with the entire generation. Will Sony repeat history? Well, given the PS5's reported internal size is 2 terabytes, and the average cost of a 1 terabyte SSD on PC is £100, it won't be cheap. And that's before you up the cost on every other licensed component that makes up a new PlayStation. Number 3. Selling you on gimmicks nobody uses. Remember the PS4's touchpad before launch, its LED light, the pause and resume function that took years to come true, or the broken promise of playing while installing? The PS3's big innovation was the 6-axis controller, which only the first Uncharted made any real use of to throw grenades or balance on beams, then the whole thing was scrapped altogether. Other than making the DualShock 4 more bulky, Sony haven't meaningfully iterated on how you interact with their hardware since the original PlayStation's analog sticks, which they took from Nintendo. Granted, they do not need to, but people looking for a meaningful overhaul of video games at the core will likely be in for a surprise. Right now, we know a handful of officially confirmed features for the new console. Advanced vibration with additional motors, haptic feedback in the controller's triggers, plus an SSD that minimizes load times into seconds, and the idea of installing games in segments if you want to prioritize single or multiplayer. These latter features will be implemented almost by default, but for the former, expect first-party studios to toe the line for the first launch year, then it'll be back to normality. Number 2. Thinking fandom and brand loyalty is free. Back to that disastrous PS3 showing, as alongside giant crabs, awkward stage announcers, and HD recreations of African plains, was the pervading sense of Sony thinking they didn't have to try because it was a given that people would buy a PS3 no matter what. I covered this earlier in regards to the price, but the sentiment that came out of E3 2006 was one of pure hubris, of a company operating through misguided confidence, completely oblivious to the idea that anything could go wrong. It's so easy to forget as it was back in 2012, but in the run-up to new consoles dropping, Sony's reputation was a shell of its current self. Going forward, Sony need to understand why people love their brand and cater to that. Things like the PlayStation Mini showed a staggering lack of care for a product that should have flown off shelves in the thousands, and the company's initial approach to crossplay and backwards compatibility was to pretend that there was no one asking for it. They've since yielded on both fronts, but there's a history of not realizing what PlayStation can offer or what it means within gaming history, and that needs to change. Number 1. Getting sick of the emerging Sony formula. Okay, picture a game. It's third person, over the shoulder. The graphics aren't especially memorable, but they shoot for realistic renders and look gorgeous. There are slow, meaningful sections driven by dialogue and others where the action picks up and you engage in small spurts of combat before falling back into exploration, sometimes interspersed with climbing. Congratulations, you've just imagined every first-party PlayStation exclusive of the generation. Even the upcoming Ghost of Tsushima looks to be following the same mold, and The Last of Us 2 will as well, despite doing so more naturally. Now, obviously, yes, this is a successful, bankable formula, and one that allows for single-player games in an industry obsessed with multiplayer platforms for content. But as you can see here, it's something increasingly obvious and recognized. Where are the RPGs, the first-person shooters, the character action games, strategy titles, card battlers, or anything in between? Is this really the only way to do a notable PlayStation exclusive? Like how the Ubisoft formula got so stale across this generation, forever opening up maps by going tower by tower, crafting components and just going along with the flow, there's an emerging Sony formula that's already starting to feel a little expected. And that's my breakdown of the potential future of PlayStation. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to check out the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.